Good evening once again, everyone. Hell's Unicorn here again. And this evening's blog is going to be a little talk about the issue of Planned Parenthood and the recent House bill depriving them of supposed federal funds. I am basically going to preface this whole blog by saying that this will be divided into two parts. The first part of which will deal specifically with my views on this from a purely libertarian standpoint. The second half will get into my paleoconservative views. So for those of you that are more of a libertarian mindset, you can stay here for the first few minutes, but as soon as I shift gears, you might want to simply exit before watching the rest of the video, particularly if you're a pro-choice libertarian, because what I am going to say on this subject is probably going to be pretty offensive to you. And although I ultimately believe that good people can't really disagree on this issue, I do essentially believe that civility is usually the best course in these things, even when they are issues of life and death. So, now to proceed forward. A few days ago, the House of Representatives voted to stop and cease all federal funding to Planned Parenthood. Now, I'm going to just state right off the bat that I think the federal government has no place whatsoever in propping up any kind of company, be it for-profit or non-profit, that offers any kind of service whatsoever, and that includes medical services. When it comes to issues of security, specifically domestic security, police force, and maybe to an extent things like firefighters and other emergency personnel, I can see that as being a different issue, and I can maybe see, at least from a perspective of security, why certain agencies in the federal government would need funding in order to carry out these procedures. There are certain things that cross state lines and which involve an outside independent entity to intervene on, and so thus in those particular cases, but more so really through the court system, I can see the idea of funding such endeavors being a worthwhile one. Not so with medical care. As far as I'm concerned, this is a issue that should be run by states, and it is the concern of states alone. And really, ideally, this should be something that should be handled locally. I don't think the state government should be even involved in this, because within every state there are multiple counties with radically different cultures and different values, and the best way to keep cultures from clashing with each other is to keep them separate and to keep the fences between them mended. And that's really the heart and soul of my support of the Republican effort to defund Planned Parenthood, and also to defund all of the other stuff that the federal government should definitely not be involved in. Why do we need a national endowment for the arts? I mean, we have a federal debt that is past $10 trillion. Why do we need to spend money on this stuff? And other stuff too. I mean, you just go down the line. We give out subsidies to companies to make cigarettes, and yet at the same time we're saying, "Ooh, cigarettes are killing everybody." Doesn't faze people. We'll subsidize it, and then we'll spend money to criminalize it. Makes perfect sense to me. There is just a wide array of utterly contradictory views as to what the government should be funding and not funding. My view on this is simple. If it is a matter of cultural contention, it needs to be dealt with by the respective cultures present in this country. Contrary to the gooey, wishy-washy, multicultural view that some people have of this country, we are not a melting pot. I'm sorry, we're not. People like to labor under the illusion that we are, but we are not. The vast majority of people tend to stick to their own, whether it's divided among religious values, political values, or even in the case of race and ethnicity. people tend to separate out and form their own communities, and it makes all the sense in the world that these communities should be granted the sovereignty to determine such things as issues of pregnancy and reproductive health, as it were. So from my libertarian standpoint, the defunding of Planned Parenthood is not only a good thing, it's also a very necessary thing in order to deal with our debt situation. That includes the portion of this blog that deals specifically with the libertarian aspect of my views. So those of you who are pro-choice and to view my videos, you can feel free to leave now. Or if you think that you can handle what I'm about to say, you can stay, but I'm not going to be responding to comments of people throwing questions as to how could I be so heartless or so callous, or how could I hate women, because I really am not in the mood. So let me just break this down for everybody, just so you can get my perspective on this. As a person who views the three fundamental rights that this country is founded upon, life, liberty, and property, I do not believe that in any circumstance whatsoever that one of those three fundamental rights should be turned against the other. And that is particularly the case when it comes to liberty versus life. If one is in some way contradicting the other, we're not dealing with either right. There is no liberty to deny the life, liberty, or property of another person. That liberty does not exist. We have crossed the threshold into tyranny at that point. And tyranny doesn't merely stop with government policy. It gets into specifically how we treat each other. And indeed, criminals are the first thing that can be pointed to in a domestic person-to-person situation where tyranny essentially results. That is the most fundamental form of tyranny, the denial of one person's rights by another through criminal activity. The government is there to punish criminals, not to necessarily prevent crime, but to punish criminals. Crime prevention is something that is done by individuals. The administration of justice is something that is done by governments. In keeping with this, I'm just going to state for the record, there is no way to disqualify a baby in the womb at any term, be it even a couple of days after conception, as not being a human being. There is no way to avoid judging them as being less than human except through arbitrary means. I hear the usual crap all the time about how a baby is essentially a parasite until it's fully passed through the lip of the vagina, which is complete and utter bullshit. I have a link to a website that goes through the specifics. It cites testimony from medical doctors, and it states very clearly that consciousness is present from the very earliest stages of pregnancy. And then I get the usual crap, it doesn't look like a baby. You know something? There are severely handicapped people that don't look like human beings in many respects. Are we going to start getting rid of them as well? Well, according to the consistent person who follows the pro-abortion mindset, yes. If you're going to be consistent about that, and then at that point you've crossed the line over into eugenics. On a fundamental level, I oppose not only the government support of Planned Parenthood, but I also oppose its existence. Now, I can't force it to go into non-existence, by means of force. It's a contradiction of my philosophy. But I can insist upon it not being present anywhere in the community which I reside, and I can very well reason that it is within my right to vote for this organization to be forcefully kept out of my immediate area of residing. I do not under any circumstance, want one of these Planned Parenthood buildings anywhere near my property, my children, or the children of my neighbors. They're free to oppose me in that, but I believe that that is my right as a citizen of the community that I live in. The history of Planned Parenthood is a very dark and disgusting one, and most people are not aware of it. All they see are the nice little flowery pictures of women getting consultation on how to be healthy and responsible adults, which is utter nonsense. The foundation of Planned Parenthood rests on a pile of sludge and raw sewage. And I'm going to close off this blog by reading some choice quotes by the founder of Planned Parenthood, Margaret Sanger, the person who is either directly or indirectly influencing the vitriol of the pro-choice trolls that I occasionally deal with on those rare videos where I discuss this topic. The first quote is taken from Margaret Sanger's Women and the New Race, Eugenics Publication Company, 1920-1923, and I quote, "The most merciful thing that a large family does to one of its infant members is to kill it." Going down the line here, this is Margaret Sanger on blacks, immigrants, and indigents. "Human weeds, reckless breeders, spawning human beings who never should have been born." And that's taken from The Pivot of Civilization, referring specifically to immigrants and poor people. On sterilization and racial purification, Sanger believed that for the purpose of racial purification, couples should be rewarded who choose sterilization. And that's taken from Birth Control in America, The Career of Margaret Sanger. That was written by David Kennedy. That was a biographic book, and it was quoting a 1923 speech she gave. On the right of married couples to bear children, couples should be required to submit applications to have a child. And she wrote that in Plan for Peace, Birth Control Review in 1932. On the purpose of birth control. The purpose in promoting birth control was to create a race of thoroughbreds. That's from Birth Control Review, November 1921. On the rights of the handicapped and mentally ill and racial minorities. More children for the fit, less for the unfit. That is the chief aim of birth control. On religious convictions regarding sex outside of marriage. This book aims to answer the needs expressed in thousands on thousands of letters to me in the solution of marriage problems. Knowledge of sex, truths, frankly and plainly presented, cannot possibly injure healthy, normal young minds. Concealment, suppression, futile attempts to veil the unveilable, these work injury, as they seldom succeed and only render those who indulge in them ridiculously. For myself, I have full confidence in the cleanliness, the open-mindedness, the promise of the younger generation. Yes, the same woman that advocates getting rid of the indigent, the weak, immigrants, black people, and the such, also has great faith in the younger generation. Let me just add a little wrinkle to that by giving my own view. I don't have faith in the younger generation because the younger generation is inexperienced and they're incomplete. They are all but empty templates, willing to be filled with whatever rubbish gets put into their heads. And the rubbish that gets put into their heads is usually the same rubbish that I'm reading from right now. And at this point, those of you that have stuck with me that are pro-choice and also libertarian, you're probably asking, how can you hold this view when it's in contradiction with the basic tenets of a free society? I'm going to simply respond by asking you a couple of questions. And these are questions I would like to have answered if you did stick through this entire video. How can you promote liberty when you only promote it for certain kinds of people? Doesn't matter if you're promoting it for 90 or even 95% of people. If the right to life is not universal And if there are conditions that can be raised that can limit it, it is no longer a right. It's a privilege. So we have a privilege to a right to life, so to speak. It's a privilege. It's not a right. So in keeping with that, who gives us the privilege? Is it a consensus of the masses of people living on this planet who cannot actually organize themselves in a consistent system without there being chaos? Second question. What is your actual standard for determining what human life actually is? Because I can guarantee you right now, the only thing that separates the beginning that occurs in the weeks after conception and what you are right now are degrees. They are degrees of fulfillment, degrees in size and degrees in developments. That's it. Some might argue that, but there's always the potential that the pregnancy might fail. Well, there's also the potential that a tiger may maul you to death after it's escaped from the zoo. Does that mean that I have the right to terminate your existence? Well, anyway, I think I'm going to conclude this rant for now. It turned a little emotional in the end, but I like to think that I was mostly keeping things within the spectrum of reasoned discourse. So until next time, with prudence to myself and benevolence to all of you, good evening.